Once upon a time in San Francisco, there was a place called Woodward's Gardens. It was San Francisco's first amusement park. It was an extraordinary example of state-of-the-art recreation in the Victorian Age. It offered expansive gardens in which to indulge in refined relaxation. It was a place to increase your exposure to art and to culture. It was a place that allowed you to get up close to something truly exotic. Most of all, Woodward's Gardens was a place to create memories. 3 generations of early San Franciscans came through its gates. Like many extraordinary things, Woodward's Gardens was invented by a person with great vision and even greater determination. That person was Robert Blinn Woodward, and this is his story. Robert Blinn Woodward was 24 years old in the winter of 1848 when he heard the news of the discovery of gold in California. Woodward seemed an unlikely person to catch gold fever. Woodward had deep roots in Providence, Rhode Island. Providence was a prosperous port city, and young Woodward was very well set up. He was being groomed to take over his father's grocery business. Plus, he had just gotten married the year before and had an infant daughter. Still, in March of 1849, he boarded a ship like this one and sailed off. He took with him a cargo load of grocery items, hoping to open a grocery store once he got to California. The ship sailed down to South America, around Cape Horn, and back up the Pacific coast. It was a grueling and treacherous journey. The voyage usually took at least 6 months. Woodward arrived in San Francisco in late November of 1849. His journey had taken 8.5 months. By the time he arrived, the population of San Francisco had exploded from less than 1,000 people to upwards of 25,000 in less than a year. This created the city's first housing crisis. In fact, as the rainy season started, the situation in San Francisco was so desperate that ships were towed into the shallows of Yerba Buena Cove and turned into hotels, stores, warehouses. One ship was even used as a jail. Woodward quickly realized that what the gold seekers needed most was a clean place to sleep and a good square meal. It was here he found his opportunity. In Gold Rush San Francisco, where a single egg might cost $1 or $2 each, Woodward started offering hearty meals 3 times a day for 50 cents apiece. Being in the grocery business, he was comfortable making a smaller profit and making it up on volume. His formula worked. He was so successful that within a year, he rented a 3-story building on Sacramento Street and opened a large dining room, then expanded it to include a hotel. He called it What Cheer House, which was a well-known name in Rhode Island. Woodward's philosophy of offering value for an affordable price soon allowed him to expand his hotel by building a 5-story building next door. He advertised that What Cheer House was conducted on strictly temperance principles, which meant that he served no alcohol at all. He soon built another 5-story building around the corner on Leadsdorff Street, connected to his other buildings. By 1858, he could accommodate 900 lodgers and feed many more than that. He is said to have turned away as many as 150 people a night. It was rumored that Woodward himself earned $100,000 a year from the hotel, the equivalent of about $3 million a year today. Now you may be thinking, what about Woodward's family? What happened to the wife and infant daughter he left back in Providence? Woodward had gone back to Providence at least once in 1855. That was the year the Panama Railroad was completed, which cut travel time from San Francisco to Providence down to a little over a month. His second daughter was born in Providence in 1856. Woodward returned to Providence again in 1857, and this time he brought his family back to California with him. To prepare for his family's arrival, Woodward bought a large piece of land out past the city cemetery near the mission lands. At the time, this was so far out of town, it wasn't even on the city map. Now, some development in the area had already started, but Woodward was still able to buy a large plot of land on Mission Street, which stretched back to Valencia between 14th and the street we now call Dubose. The first thing Woodward did was build a large home for his family. The house was simple in design, especially compared to the elaborate mansions that would soon rise on Nob Hill, but Woodward's home wouldn't stay simple for long. Collecting exotic plants was a popular hobby among the wealthy at the time, including Woodward. He built a huge greenhouse next to his house to hold his growing collection. His greenhouses rapidly expanded to at least twice the size of his house. Woodward added an elaborate system of ponds, perhaps in part to control flooding, connected by a river, in which he kept a pair of black Australian swans and other waterfowl. As the owner of a popular hotel in the busiest city on the West Coast, Woodward was able to easily make connections to obtain not only exotic plants, but unusual specimens of all types from all over the world. By 1860, his collection was so large that he opened a small museum inside What Cheer House. A local newspaper reported that Woodward's display included over 600 stuffed birds, 1,200 blown eggs, 2,000 shells of all types, and 1,200 copper coins, some dating back to Julius Caesar. At the same time, Woodward's family was also expanding. In 1858, their third child and only son was born in San Francisco. Another daughter was born in 1860, but tragically she died in infancy. Perhaps to escape their grief, in 1861, Woodward took his family on a year-long tour of Europe. Woodward turned the trip into a buying spree. In Rome, Woodward met up with the American artist Virgil Williams. Like many other young artists, Williams was perfecting his painting techniques by copying the great masterpieces in the European museums. Woodward bought up every single work in Williams' studio. Then he gave Williams a generous advance payment and sent him off to copy more works for him over the next year. Back home, Woodward added an art gallery to his conservatory. In February 1865, Woodward opened his home to the public for the first time. He did it as a benefit for the Sanitary Commission, which was an organization that supported the veterans of the Civil War. He called it Woodward's Villa, and the admission price was 50 cents, which included access to the Pompeian Museum, Conservatory, and Zoological Gardens. It was an immediate hit. It wasn't long before Woodward opened his gates to the public full-time. He moved his family up to a vineyard estate outside of Napa and turned what had been their house into a museum which contained his various specimens. He added an aquarium for his fish and a pond where he kept 3 or 4 sea lions. Still believing in his idea of setting a low price and making it up on volume, Woodward built a huge pavilion to host musical and dance performances and accommodate large conventions. He dropped the admission price to 25 cents to draw bigger crowds and keep it filled. Even though the neighborhood around him continued to grow, Woodward was able to acquire 2 more plots of land on the south side of 14th Street. One he used to build a car barn for the streetcars he began to run along Mission Street. These brought people from downtown directly to his gardens. On the larger, odd-shaped plot, he created a strange sort of zoo, which he connected to the rest of his gardens by building a tunnel under 14th Street. Within a year or so of opening his gardens, Woodward invited the young photographer Eadward Muybridge to take pictures of it. Muybridge is probably best known today for his pioneering work in both panoramic and stop-motion photography. His early photos of Woodward's gardens have mostly been forgotten, but they provide the only glimpse we have behind the gates. This is Woodward's conservatory and the art gallery he added. Here's a peek inside the art gallery. This is Woodward's pavilion, which was built on a large hill. Down below is the boat pond. Not just children, but everyone wanted to ride the boat pond. Riders sat in a giant wheel which slowly turned, powered by the windmill you can just see at the top of this photo. If there was no wind, then they had to rely on punting or rowing to move the wheel. Since the opening of the Panama Railroad, more families had settled in San Francisco, and Woodward's Gardens offered something for everyone. Muybridge photographed Woodward's Gardens in several visits over a 10-year time span. Cameras at that time used glass plates and very slow shutter speeds, so these are not candid shots. They may look to our eyes like modern selfies, but they were carefully arranged by Muybridge. Woodward may have asked Muybridge to photograph his extensive taxidermy collection, or it may have been the photographer's own idea. In any case, Muybridge seemed to enjoy posing the stuffed creatures both with each other and with humans. He took a small selection of Woodward's stuffed birds and mounted them on posts along the path to the museum that had once been Woodward's house. He created groups of small woodland creatures, and then also showed off Woodward's pair of stuffed polar bears. Consider this shot of a tiger emerging from the bushes, teeth bared, ready to pounce. The same tiger also appears in this scene, apparently unbothered by the other animals who are also devouring their prey. Then the same tiger, still in mid-pounce, gets petted by a very brave woman. Woodward's Gardens offered live animals as well. There were cages full of small animals and birds, and if you went through the tunnel under 14th Street to the corral area, there were camel rides. Woodward imported his animals from around the world, often using sea lions caught for him in the San Francisco Bay to trade for more exotic specimens. Woodward's collection of live animals included a tiger, a lion, and a few bears. 1 or 2 times a day, the bears would be let out of their cages and set loose on a climbing structure for the entertainment of the garden's guests. Just about when Woodward's Gardens was reaching the peak of its popularity, Robert Woodward died. He was 65 years old. He left his assets to be divided among his 4 children. His oldest child, Mary, was 31. She and her husband took over management of What Cheer House and Woodward's Gardens. Now, whether it was bad management or simply that the public's tastes had changed, both What Cheer House and Woodward's Gardens went into a slow decline. What Cheer House became a flop house until it was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake and fire. As for Woodward's Gardens, by 1890 the land had become more valuable than the attraction. It was finally closed for good in 1893. Overall, it was a sad ending. Crates full of stuffed birds, animals, and other specimens were sold off for pennies. The living animals had been long neglected, and several starved to death. Others were shot in their cages by their new owners simply for bragging rights. One of the bears was reported to have been on the menu at a local restaurant. The artwork, statues, and many of the plants were bought by Alfred Sutro, who was, just at this time, building Sutro baths out by Ocean Beach. So they went on to delight San Franciscans for many years to come. But you can still find traces of Woodward's Gardens in the Mission today. Woodward's Pavilion was replaced by a theater used for vaudeville acts through the 1920s. George Burns got his start there. Then it was bought out by a Greek Orthodox congregation. Their brand new cathedral building occupies the site today. And just around the corner, the old Armory building stands on the site of what was once Woodward's streetcar barn. There is also a small alley called Woodward Street that runs only 1 block, cutting through from 14th to Duboce. It goes over the land where Woodward's home and his grand conservatory and art gallery once stood. Thanks for joining us for this special presentation on Woodward's Gardens. If you'd like to see more presentations like this, visit the San Francisco Historical Society at sfhistory.org. And remember, it's your donations that make programs like this possible. Thank you.